What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves? Physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing the past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, you know, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. And this is the healing technique that we've now been teaching it, well, since 2002, that's 12 years.
What if you could time travel with them? Visit mythical places or angelic realms, other worlds, other galaxies. Help others to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT, and now you can learn her method by going directly to dolorescannon.com. And don't forget to mention the discount code MORETALKS.
Established over 100 years ago, Watkins Books is one of the world's oldest and leading independent bookshops specializing in esoterica. We have the widest selection of esoteric books in the UK, and our friendly and knowledgeable staff are here to assist you in a unique ambience of our shop. So come and visit us in the heart of London as we're open every day.
The comments and views expressed on The More Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the view of Kevin Moore, The More Show, or this radio station and its affiliate or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only.
Broadcasting from the UK and across the world online. You're now watching the UK's only alternative late night talk show, and I'm your host, Kevin Moore. For the next hour, I'll be covering subjects that will open up your mind and provide you with information you may have never heard before. On today's show, I'm about to be joined with my guest, Lisette Larkins. Now, Lisette in 1987 had her whole world turned upside down when she began to be contacted by extraterrestrials. Now, at first, unsure of what was happening to her, she considered that she was perhaps losing her mind. But after extensive psychological testing and evaluation, she was assured to be of sound mind. Now, eventually, Lazette came to understand that, like many otherwise ordinary people around the world, she is part of a growing trend whereby more and more humans are being contacted by inhabitants from other galaxies. Lisette Larkins, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming on. And do you know what? I've done a number of ET or outer world related interviews recently, and they've sort of come at just at the right time as well for me, I think, because I find them fascinating. I do a lot of consciousness interviews. As well, and I try to nowadays, bring that consciousness element into any ET interviews, which not everyone does. But your work is heavily connected with those two paths. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, just before we get going then, because I know we've only got 51 minutes, we may go over, if we can go over, we will do, right? Just tell us a little bit about yourself prior to 1987. Who were you prior to your first encounters? What happened in your childhood? Was there any sort of paranormal phenomena in a sense?
Yes, when I was about 7, as a child, I had my first contact experience, but I didn't talk to anybody about it. I just became fascinated by the sky. I became almost, I would say in school, quite introverted. I was very quiet, very shy. And then I kind of forgot all about it. And then had a relatively normal upbringing. And then fast forward another, decades really. And then I was starting to become lost, which was interesting because I became lost as I became involved in deeper interpersonal relationships. Particularly, I got married. And many of us do become lost in marriages or close bonded ties because, well, they're designed to do that, interestingly enough. Relationships are designed to expose, well, our deficits. And so mine became very exposed, well, to everybody, including myself. And I started to feel very lost, depressed. What's it all about? I had a lot of difficulties in marriage, particularly when my child was born. So there I was, pregnant, with all of the issues that pregnant women have, both in their marriage, with working, with being a mother or a mother-to-be. And our marital problems intensified. And after my son was born, soon after that, about 8 months after that, I started to have contact experiences all over again.
When you say all over again, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, I had really forgotten all my life that I'd had any contact as a child. In fact, time has a way of kind of relegating it to, well, maybe it was a dream, maybe, it wasn't in my consciousness. So much so that when I would see a tabloid or a magazine, or I would hear about somebody who was so-called abducted, or people were laughing at parties about these kooks, I was laughing right along with them. I had no identification as a person who was having otherworldly experiences.
Well, that's interesting. So when did those memories, those past memories, become active?
Not until my contact really started kicking in. And it was kind of like, wow, oh, I remember this. I remember these beings. But, I'm getting ahead of myself because there was a lot of trauma and drama before I recognized what was happening to me. And the trauma, by the way, was not inherently as a result of wrongdoing on the ET's part. The trauma was in the context of living in our society, in which this isn't supposed to happen, in which I was lost, in which my husband thought I was losing it. So all of that contributed to the sense of trauma. And it took me years to kind of figure out what was going on. And I mean that, years. It took a 3-week psychiatric stay. It took 6 years of intensive psychotherapy until I really started to feel confident that, well, I was told that after 6 years of analysis, both with a team of clinicians and individual and group therapy, multiple kind of venues of psychotherapy, in which I was told your mental state is as solid as a rock. And so I was able to kind of go forward in my exploration of my experiences in that context, rather in the context of I'm crazy. You see, so it was a long journey for me.
Oh yeah, yeah. You come across to me very centered. I said it to some people, but you do, and that's a great place to be. You don't. I wonder, what would you say to yourself all those years ago? What would you say to the 1987 version of yourself right now?
I just keep going, because I knew I would get there, and other people who are lost or depressed or in trauma, just keep going. Just keep going, because what I later learned through my contact experiences, which is what my passion is now to talk about, which is I was taken to the interlife, the life in between lives. How I was able to do that without physiologically dying, as people do who have near-death experiences. How I was able to have that happen, it's a mystery to me. But the phenomena of it, being able to see what happens when we die and go there and somehow have time suspended and see the arrangements and agreements I made before I was born into this life, as well as seeing major scenes from other lives which were impacting this life, it was just mind-blowing. And of course, for me, that's where the power is, because when we look behind the veil, it's not just necessarily about the phenomena of otherworldly experiences, because at the end of the day, so what? It's about why the meaning behind it, who we are as immortal beings, to me, that is the power.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm just writing a question down. You've just actually triggered something off. That's so fascinating what you've got to say there. I had no idea you was about to say that. So we're going to get back into the interlife very shortly. That is fascinating. I don't think anyone said that to me before. Not with respect to this nature of reality when we were talking about UFOs and extraterrestrials. Okay, well, as you said before, you was in a painful place in a sense. Relationships, God, don't they bring up? Aren't they the best place to get experience from? The souls must crave for relationships.
By design.
Yes.
It's by design, and so those of us who are avoiding relationships are doing so for a reason, because we know that they're messy. We know that. Look at we're all out there wrestling in our relationships, and then we end some, and then we call that divorce, and then we start others. And yet, by design, the whole point of it is to expose our deficits to ourselves. Because a characteristic of immaturity, spiritual immaturity, is self-deception. So as we grow, we're trying to see ourselves more clearly. We're trying to see where we need to grow with 20/20 vision. Of course we can see it in our partners. Of course we can see it in ISIS. Of course we can see it in our politicians. When we see our deficits within ourselves, that's where the growth is, when we start to really want to grow beyond that.
Okay, where do we go from here then? I think what you're saying is really fascinating, actually, and I knew this was going to be an interesting interview.
Yes.
Yeah. One thing I think we need just to touch on as well before we move on is what was your first experience in 1987? What was your awakening experience?
It didn't really work that way, Kevin, because the first experience was traumatic, meaning explosions of light through the ceiling. My husband was out of town. I was in my bed awake. My baby was down the hall in his crib, and there was phenomena, and a lot of it. Electromagnetic vibrations. I felt like I was being electrocuted. There were sounds, and deafening sounds, bright lights. But the reason why it had no context is because I didn't know it was happening, and that kind of thing continued to happen several times a week for a long time. But other things were happening. For example, I noticed that there were changes with the machines in the house, from the toaster to things were starting to not work properly, and there was an electromagnetic charge in the house all the time. I noticed that I started to hear what people were thinking, which was very strange. I started to have second sight, so to speak, meaning I started to develop characteristics that a medium would have. But it didn't bring me comfort, because I'd never had those experiences before, at least in this in this particular lifetime. And so it was very unsettling for me. And I would be in the middle of a communication with somebody, and I would start to see these videos in the background of snippets from the future. And I thought, well, first of all, am I going crazy? Secondly, if I am seeing this, what does it mean? And what bearing does it have on this moment? So there was all this phenomena, but it took me a long time to piece it all together.
So when did you become aware then of them, and who are they?
I finally had a visual, meaning for a long time, for years, visual was solely bright lights, crackling electromagnetic sparks, blue flashes of light, white flashes of light, videos, mediumistic videos, snippets of the future. But then it was years until I finally felt my body moving, and my eyes actually opened, and I saw something with my physical eyes. And I then came to see several of these little gray beings that we call extraterrestrial, and at the moment they happen to look, the typical gray being with the inverted pear-shaped head and the large black eyes. But from what I understand now, they have the ability to shape shift. So appearance really means nothing. And I know certain people speak or write about certain beings attributed to certain characteristics. For example, you've heard people say, well, the Pleiadians are the nice aliens and the reptilians are the mean aliens. But when you really understand what spiritual evolution is and how a being is able to use matter, then the shape can change. By the way, we as humans do that too. It's called reincarnation. So we change in each lifetime. So the beings that I saw in that moment looked this certain way, but then I came to learn and understand about how living beings, depending on their level of maturity, spiritual maturity, are able to change the way that they look. And this goes on in the interlife when we die and we become spiritually, we become our spiritual selves. We are able to take on any appearance that we want. We may take on the appearance of our favorite physical incarnation. So it's a characteristic that is taken on by all immortal beings, not just aliens.
So let me get this right. You're saying that these greys, as you first foresaw them, as time went on and your truth changed, and your understanding changed, you were able to see them as something different than what they were. They were not really that form. Or are you saying that in the physical form they were that form, but when you went to the interlife they were something quite different? Which one? Or both?
Right. We can take on any appearance we want in the moment as we attain spiritual maturity. You see?
Okay.
So those beings, I saw their incarnation in that moment. And then in the interlife, I saw their appearance differently based on which appearance they were showing me.
But they were formed in this incarnation, in this moment now, in that particular body. I mean, I can't change my body as it is now. This
Right.
is the form I am. You're not saying they changed form over time to you. You're saying in the interlife you got to see their true nature, which is their consciousness, which is who they really are, as we are.
Yes, but the difficulty with the question is that it suggests that when they're in the interlife and I see them in the interlife, that their spiritual essence somehow is disguised. It's just, for example, the way that electromagnetic intelligent energy looks, it's just light. It's an electromagnetic light. So that's the way we all look. But we usually don't keep that light, even in the interlife. Rather, I misspoke. We keep the essence of the light, but we take on the appearance of whoever we choose based on with whom we're interacting. So, for example, if I die and I see you, Kevin, in the interlife, you and I will show each other this form because this is how we knew each other. I'll go, oh yeah, there he is. I remember I did this show, So you see what I mean? I'm not going to take on the appearance that I had in a different life with you unless we also had that life and we shared that life.
Right, yeah. So my confusion there was, sorry about that, was just I thought you meant in this reality, over time you saw that grey shift to another form, but no.
That has happened too.
Oh, that's happened too.
Yes.
And would you say that's happened because their spiritual advancement is way beyond us, and also their veil is a lot less than ours?
Yes, and also I developed along with them, not to their degree, but we're all growing and we're all developing. So I was continuing to develop myself, and I continued the ability to see beyond the veil more deeply over time. That's to some degree what we're all doing within our own individual lifetime. Because when we're young, we're knuckleheads, often, many of us. And then as we grow and mature, we become and we demonstrate more wisdom. And then eventually, we hope that we'll be children and young adolescents and demonstrate that wisdom without needing to wait until we're in our 40s or 50s or 60s. And if you look at the actuary tables from insurance companies, they know that. They know that people act more wisely in their older age for the most part. And that's what we're doing as human beings, because the spiritual mind has melded with the human mind, and we're trying to impinge our spiritual identity on our knucklehead human brain.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
as it were.
And I suppose as we get older, we get closer to our higher self. We get closer to our true essence of who we are, I think, and which is all-knowing, all-loving, kindness, just everything that's good in a sense, which is what we are. But, we come down here to have an earthly experience. We come down here to screw up. We come down here to make a mess and make mistakes. And we also come down here to live our purpose as well. Some of us try to do that. I mean, I always say I've got 2 feet. One's in the spiritual side, one's in this reality. And I'd never have both in the spiritual. I'd never have both in this. I'd have a balance. It's a balance, because I'm sure I came here desperate to come here, and I'm not going into, just because I've awoken, to just get in, to be with the fairies all the time. I want it to be in both. I want to experience this reality that we're in on Earth, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Yeah, there's
absolutely. And that's why this Earth location is such a challenge. It's probably one of the biggest challenges in the whole universe, because we not only have mental challenges, but we have physical challenges. So we can experience the grief emotionally and also physically. And some people choose both. We all know people who have, say, a physical handicap and a broken heart. So here we are, all doing the best that we can, and we keep being tested if we have a high adaptability to change.
Right. Let me just say something as well. It feels like, and it sounds like, that your contacts have been nothing but revolutionary to you, in a sense, for your soul and your reconnection back to that. And really, it feels like you've come forward with teaching knowledge. It's almost like you've channeled, but you haven't. Your connection with whatever you're connected with, which we'll get into in a second if they've got a name or names, it has really come forward to really evolve you spiritually so that you can pass this knowledge on to others.
Well, if that's so, I'm deeply grateful for that. But if that is so, it only came about through trauma and suffering, which, by the way, is the point of experiencing wrongdoing. If you have to sum up what Earth is, it's a place to experience wrongdoing. It does not mean that there's not incredible beauty and love and the ocean and the beauty of flowers and all of the things that we love. But the way that the whole game is set up, and it's very hard for people to really get behind this, but the whole design of the system is that the soul progresses through experiencing every kind of wrongdoing imaginable. And we can all name 1,000 different, we've got, we all know, write them all on the chalkboard. And some of us set ourselves up to experience wrongdoing through certain different venues. Some of us come in as a homosexual or as a gay person to experience the ridicule of society. I mean, that is there's tremendous pain, internal pain that goes along with being ridiculed in a culture. And that's one way to put yourself on a fast track. There are a lot of other ways too. And so somebody might choose a physical handicap. So certain people that or I know who have very little pain in their life, whether physical or emotional or interpersonal, may have just decided to kind of take it easy for this life. But the way that it's set up is that it's the wrongdoing that we face, the pressures, the social pressures, the being accused wrongly, on and on and on. Those are what develop us.
Okay, but beautiful what you're saying, and thank you so much for what you're sharing as well. But don't you find that the knowledge that you've got has only come from the experiences that you've been through? Where has this knowledge come from? How have you remembered the truth of your soul by what you're saying? Is that through your ET contacts?
Yes, because it enabled me to over and over and over again talk about having a foot in two worlds. I was going back and forth. I would have these contact experiences, and then I would find myself experiencing this tunnel effect that we all know what that is. The near-death experience, tunnel effect. And then I'm in the interlife, and I'm seeing snippets of another lifetime. So, for example, in the early days, I saw a snippet, like a video, of my own life, of me in my life being persecuted, and it was horrible. And so, for 10, 20 years, I'm like, why? What was the point of seeing that? And others like it. And so I started to finally connect the dots through deep introspection and notice some of the same characteristics that wove through that personality and that life and the challenges that I was facing today. And so, that's what exploration is, spiritual exploration is we're coming full circle, is to, when we stop deluding ourselves as to what we're working on individually here, because we have to stop focusing on everybody else's faults in order to do that, and it's not easy. The self-deception has its own kind of standard denial laws of its own. When we finally start doing that, which is what I tried to start doing myself, was to look at, what is it about me that needs healing? What is it about me that is, there's an point? And so it was that way that I was really able to use the phenomena of the ET experiences by looking at what I was being shown in the interlife, by noticing the common themes that ran through those other lives of mine and my life now, and look at those common themes and realize what I had come here to do.
And do you think the people that you attract with helping other people remember their own truth through your truth, that rather than channeling, for example, there's a way to connect to your higher self and to connect to the knowledge that you've gained, do you think the way that you've brought this knowledge forward through the process that you've been through will attract some people who will find it easier to be connected with the way you've done it, rather than someone that's gone through channeling or someone that's gone through some other means? As in, like, everyone spiritual teacher, which you are in a sense, I mean, you may not like that word, but you are sharing your spiritual knowledge, has their own audience that are attracted to them because it's the easiest and quickest way in for them with the way and the process that you've done it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all kind of, whether for a long period or a short period, come into contact with somebody who speaks to our soul. And vice versa, we come into contact with people who just really get our goat. We just, what is it about that person that I really don't like? And so both of those are serving us because, well, we've all heard the whole point is that one can be a mirror and the other one can be, because the friends and the foes, let's face it, we all know, we can pick through our own families of origin and our own marriages and pick out those people. How did that person come to be so close in my family? And it's like fire and ice. So that's all by design.
No,
right?
I mean, it's so right what you say. Sorry to butt in there, but it is because, as you were saying before, we come here to learn. It feels like, and it can be a very painful experience. I mean, and that pain can be in so many vast ways. I just, in my head, just keep going back to relationships because I think there's so many people in painful relationships right now where, and I'm not talking about they're together, I'm talking about they've split, yet they're still together because maybe they've got kids and stuff, and there's so much pain in between them because some people are moving on, some people aren't, there's all sorts of other issues taking place, and, it really just forces you to come back to, who am I? Can I have more bliss in my life than what's presently there right now? Do I love myself enough to want that? How much do I love myself? And most times you'll find that disturbances within yourself when you're really in so much pain really comes from core things that you don't love yourself enough. And even though, how can that come from a relationship breakup? But everything is a spark back to some of your core issues. You've just got to remember what they are sometimes, or come up with that conclusion yourself. But I think I see it in a lot of interviews, where people talk about self-love. It's a big thing. I'm just mentioning that right now. I don't know why, it just popped into my head. God, there's so many questions. Interlife. How did an ET experience get you into the interlife?
Scientifically, I have no idea. I have no idea, and it's so great because I don't even attempt to try to figure it out any more than I can figure out that how does a supreme being, as some kind of a supreme council of elders, keep it all running, and how do we progress, and how do our soul groups get chosen? I can't figure all these things out, but having witnessed this whole system whereby in the interlife we have our soul groups, and we've been together since the beginning of our incarnation, and we help each other and stick with each other through thick and thin, through lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. And then eventually we kind of break off and specialize in some area, but we never lose that group as our dear, dear, dear family. And so that whole process, where we always have our wise elders to guide us. And then as we mature ourselves, we're always looking over our shoulder and helping those who are coming behind us. And so I think one of the keys for humans now is to be able to recognize what the characteristics are of immature human beings, or those souls who are in the first part of their program. Because when we really are able to calmly look at the characteristics of a young soul, and a young soul is only somebody who is, well, starting out on their program of incarnations, and those people act a certain way. And when we understand that that kind of demonstration of immaturity, the person who flips you off, or the person who's constantly bickering and striving for supremacy, immaturity looks a certain way. And the interesting thing is the majority of the population are in the beginning part of their program. If you could really think about that for a second, that's profound. It's a profound reality, because then we understand, everything becomes understandable. Because in that context, then everything is comprehensible. We can understand what our job is as we relate to each other, all of us in different levels of attainment. And so when we know people who are constantly striving for supremacy over us, they're constantly seeking an authoritarian power over others. And of course, those are their tests to overcome, and many don't overcome them, or maybe not in their first part of their life, and maybe as they age, they will. But then we can kind of give it a context and also recognize that at one time or another, we too were in the early stages of our program and may have behaved no better.
Again, just beautiful teachings. And as you say, thank you for your honesty. You don't understand how the connection of going into the interlife and the ET connection is there. You don't understand how, but you have had this experience. And just to remind people, the interlife is that life is the life between life state. It's you could call it heaven. Some people personify it as home. It's the true nature of where we go to, of who we are. It's this state where our higher self lies. It's this place where we've always been and always will go back to.
Yes, and I think for me the biggest surprise was that it's not a place where we're just floating around in a disembodied state, singing, and it's a place of intense purpose. If you think there's activity here in this realm on Earth, where we're directed and we're focused and we have relationships and we have goals, none of that changes. What is absent is the competition and the mistrust and the suspicion and all of that. None of that exists. So it is this amazing place of understanding and compassion and awareness, because we have regained our identity as to who we are as immortal beings. But the other misconception that I had is that everybody is perfect in the interlife. It's not that we're all perfect. If we were, there would be no reason to be born again into a new life and to learn and to grow. Instead, we regain at death, usually immediately, our identity, our memory of who we are as an immortal soul, and then go, oh gosh, what was I thinking? And when we think of all the, in this moment, some stupid things that we've done, or particularly with suicides, we never ever want to consider suicide as an option, because it just means that we're really losing time. It's not that we're punished. It's that it's a complete waste of time, because we will ourselves want to come back again in the same kind of circumstance and do it until we get it right. So it's just inefficient.
And you think how desperate those souls that commit suicide were to come here in the first place, how desperate they were to queue up to come here. But then you could also but you could also say, maybe can some things meant to be? Are some things meant to be so that the souls around the person who's committed suicide get to experience the grief, which sounds awful, but could that be something that could be destined?
It's never destined that a person is going to exit in suicide. But if that person, let's just say one is close to somebody who committed suicide and that it was their sole purpose to experience that kind of loss. In that case, it could have been that had that person not committed suicide, they would have died prematurely in some other way. So that person can still, the person near and dear to them can still experience the loss. But it's never a predetermined thing for suicide, no, because if it were, the whole design is that we overcome the obstacle that we've set for ourselves with our wise team, and that we learn how to rise above it and overcome it in one way or another.
Okay.
Even if it's just where we recognize there's nothing that can be done about it, right? Somebody who's paralyzed, like Christopher Reeve, has to get to a point where, there's peace there. And so it doesn't mean that we solve the problem. Sometimes solving the problem is just recognizing that we can't solve the problem. But certainly there is as much growth for somebody who is still here as somebody who would seem to exit prematurely. But absent suicide, it's very rare for a death to be so-called accidental.
Okay. And obviously there's lots of different religions here. There's lots of different truths in the spiritual community as well. There's lots of different spiritual gurus with their own unique take on things, never all the same. Some of the core principles are the same, like unconditional love and a few other things, but each with a unique individual truth. And when they pass on, they go back home with that unique individual truth. And I don't think when they go back home and enter back to the reality of where we come from, that reality is going to say, no, I deny your truth. Now this is the ultimate truth. I think when you go back home, and you bump into people, then you mix with people, they're all searching for truth. And I also do believe as well that there's multiple infinitive levels above the first level that we go to go on to. And I believe that these levels are talking to each other, trying to find their own truth. And it seems to be truths that are trying to lead maybe back to God, or trying to lead back to who they once were, this infinite, immortal being, whatever this is. So what my point is, yes, you've got your truth, but I think we can each carry our own truth when we carry on as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, as simple as that. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, some people may watch this and say, well, that resonates with me, but that doesn't. But that's okay, because you probably go back home with your own truth, and it's so important to the collective, or the bigger picture, your own truth, even to the taste of milk chocolate.
Yes, I, like all people, I speak from my own observations and my own experiences. So my understanding of the nature of, the universe just comes from my own experiences and from what I've seen in the interlife and experienced as a result of this kind of dual perspective. And this idea that even within the UFO field itself, there's a certain opinion about what's happening with respect to what it means to have contact experiences, and sometimes I have a very different perspective on that, just because from my own experience, trauma is not always what it seems to be. And so when we really break down what trauma is, in my own example, I was fairly traumatized. I would say I had probably post-traumatic stress from having these interlife experiences and having extraterrestrial contact experiences in the context of being married to somebody who was a military officer, in the context of having a child and working, and the social pressures of that. And yet, really, when you look, when I break it down, there was really no inherent harm taking place. It was just the trauma of being alive and having that happen.
Absolutely. So, so many questions in. I'm sorry to everyone if we're darling all over the place. It's just
No.
constrictions of time. There's so much could be said here. This could take interview after interviews to get this all out, right? It's a lifetime of work here that you've gone through. Okay, so. I think, are the contacts still happening, and are you still going into the interlife?
The contacts still happen, and as far as the interlife, I'm so grounded in that reality now. It's part of my hour-to-hour perception. So everything that I do is imbued with knowing that I have a counsel who's observing me. I know that frame by frame, my life currently will be evaluated by me and my team. So as I'm doing something, I bring a humor going, oh, this is going to really play well, or that I didn't handle so well. This, I was on my game. So, but it doesn't happen at the end of a certain period, or it doesn't need to happen in a spiritual retreat. Now for me, it's totally imbued in my consciousness. So I bring that in every waking moment. It doesn't mean that I'm perfect at all. It means that as I go now, I recognize what I'm here to do, what I'm trying to probably accomplish, where I flunked, where I lost my patience, where I didn't lose my patience, where I shone, just a part of me just was shining. So I bring that with me on a kind of moment to moment, hourly to hourly basis. And for me, that's very satisfying.
Now, obviously, I've only touched upon your material briefly because of a bit of a crazy day, but I understand that obviously, and from what you've said, abductions happened. You went through windows, you traveled through walls. That's right, yeah.
Except I don't refer to them as abductions only because I guess the definition of an abduction is that it's a kidnapping.
Right.
And I really don't feel that I was kidnapped because I was simply an immortal soul experiencing beings with whom I've had different intercarnational experiences with, and I was coming together again. Now, the human brain calls it an abduction. I don't remember that. But as I kind of solved the whole puzzle, then I came to recognize that this was a group that I'd had other incarnations with, and I was experiencing them here now as me, Lisette, on planet Earth.
Yeah.
So there was no kidnapping happening.
Now, Dolores Cannon, she's obviously passed, but her work would agree with what you're saying. Dr. David Jacobs would go totally against what you're saying and say, they're a threat, and they're a threat to the people that are taking them. I don't agree with Dr. David Jacobs. I respect his work because that's what he's put his time into, and fair, good on him for doing what he's done. But I don't agree with it coming from negativity unless there is multiple entities, multiple beings, multiple races. That's what I'm saying, with different agendas. That could be the case, and some of the cases he's touched upon are cases of agendas where they're not in alignment with which we're talking about, or the race that's abducting you is talking about.
Well, we know that here on Earth, we kind of touched on it earlier, that the reason why it's such a challenge, the reason why there are so many flavors of wrongdoing, is because we're all in different levels of spiritual attainment. And when you throw 7-8 billion people together in a home, planet Earth home, with different levels of spiritual attainment, it's going to be messy. Now, that whole standard of growth, of life, is not simply occurring on planet Earth. It's happening in the whole universe. Beings everywhere, souls everywhere are incarnating in different places, going through the same process. So when we understand that there are different levels of spiritual attainment, and we know that each level of attainment has a certain kind of core characteristics. Immature beings behave this way, more mature beings behave that way. So does it really matter where the acting out is going on? In my opinion, it's a given. We've got planet Earth, we've got ISIS over there, and we've got teachers
So true.
who are being of complete service for almost no money, loving and caring for our children in the day, and they're angels on earth. So we know that there's a different standard of spiritual attainment right here. So of course that's reflected in the greater universe.
But why can't these researchers come to that conclusion that you are? Because it makes sense to me what you're saying. What I've just asked you, the question, you've answered my question, agreeing in a sense, not personifying different words, but agreeing with on the same basis. Yet you've got these nuts and bolts researchers and these other ones, and they're not able to look at it this way. They're in this lifetime they'll never be able to look at it this way, because one, they've made a paradigm for themselves and they kind of box themselves into that kind of thinking, and they've got a following that would probably turn against them if they so chose to do something different. But they just don't want to see it. I suppose as well, let me just say this, that maybe spiritually where they're at, they're not able to connect the dots because they're just not at that spiritual level, not because there's no right or wrong, but because they're just not there yet.
Exactly. And because fear and uncertainty is a perspective of undeveloped soul. So if fear and uncertainty is the perspective of an undeveloped soul, by no fault of their own, they're starting out on the program. We don't look down at our kindergartners and say, look at that idiot, that kid hasn't mastered, geometry, they can't even do 2 + 2 yet. We understand that's how kindergartners behave. So when people are fearful and suspicious and uncertain, and they hold this idea that love and trust only bring hurt, we know we're dealing with an undeveloped soul. So their work, their professional life, their family life is going to look like that. They're going to be attracted to spending time developing ideas that kind of align with their basic perspective of the world.
And those who have had those abductions with those entities that are of a lower spiritual level, those who have had those abductions will be attracted to the people that are at the right level to express their abductions.
Yes. Now let's clarify one thing. That doesn't mean that if you are, let's just say all of those who agree with this idea, get on a plane and fly to Syria, and then we're abducted by an ISIS person who captures us and threatens to cut off our head. Now we are really dealing with real danger and real fear, right? I mean, we can agree that there actually does exist in our world.
Of course.
Horror and abduction and all manner of torture, and so of course it exists. It's not about being a Pollyanna. Of course it exists, but the more important question to ask ourselves is, if we are experiencing it, what am I to do with it? What am I to do with that? So really the question is, if somebody insists that they are themselves being wronged, whether it's through child sexual abuse or through physical violence from a spouse, or if they were driving in their car and they were carjacked, there's a different. We already discussed, there's so many ways to be harmed. But if a person finds themselves being harmed for real, then the idea is, what is being asked of that soul to do with that? And sometimes it's as simple as learning how to heal beyond it and get on with life. Because there's a lot of that in this realm. There's a lot of ways to be wronged. And sometimes the whole point is just to heal from it and move on and continue to contribute something positive to the culture.
Oh, God, if only people could think like that. That is so true what you're saying. And that wrong, it might not be abuse, it might not be something even as horrible as that, right? Whatever that, whatever it may be, right? It might just be your ex, the way your ex-partner's treating you, which is, I suppose that could be quite abusive, whether it's verbally could be, right? What I'm saying to it could be right close at home sometimes in that sense, and it's how you deal with that and how you move on from how you, like you say, what positivity are you going to go out there to make a difference in the world? It may be being a good mum, maybe being a good dad, it may be then, finding your purpose or doing that which you love, which would be of great purpose to other people or great prosperity to other people. I do get where you're coming from. It does make a hell of a lot of sense, and I think it will resonate with a lot of people watching or listening to this as well. And when you talked about the abductions as well, sorry, try not to use that word because I know it was.
That's okay.
But you know how but that the majority of people would understand that word.
Right.
I'm now speaking to people where the thinking is you could say well out there in a sense, and thank God it is, where they're saying that these abductions are not on a physical level, they're on a soul level. These entities aren't abducting the body, they're abducting the soul with understandings that are beyond our current understanding. So when you say you went through a wall, well, yes, you did in the ether, in the soul sense, but your body was still in that bed all that time.
There's both that happen. I've experienced both. First of all of our soul has the ability to, leave when we sleep. So this is not some far out idea that we're, as the soul stays there, because we do leave, particularly as when we're children or when we are unconscious through a car accident, or so we are able to leave the body. And so this whole idea that if we are in the physical body that we can actually witness otherworldly life, I realize that seems quite impossible, but it happens. It is possible, as is the ability to leave the physical body in a room and to experience something interdimensional, and that happens too, and I've experienced both. And it's perfectly fine if it's, not understandable.
Well, what race or interdimensional or non-interdimensional, who were taking you? Who were connecting with you?
A group of beings. I can't even give them a name. I used to try to. The problem is that the name is only relevant to that particular incarnation. So we do have soul names, as I understand it, that are kind of attained at a certain level of development that stay with us in the interlife. But as you know, in each life we're living anywhere from a few years to 100 years, and the name that we're given changes. Well, it's the same for all incarnating beings. The name changes, and so if I am aware of a being that looks, 4 foot tall with dolphin-like gray skin, that we would call an alien, and then I become aware through a mystical process, and I see that being looking a different way, having shared a different life with me in a different incarnation. So that in that incarnation it was called Bob, and in this one it was called Shamu, and that one. So what is the name? I know 5 names, so I kind of got names because it's irrelevant at this point to me.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you for that. And okay, in the interlife, the nature of where we go to when we pass on, where we've been before we came here, there is no time. So it seems to me, from my understanding of what other people have told me as well, but from my truth as well, that the soul is able to have multiple incarnations, past, present, future. Do you feel that which is abducting you on a soul, on a, because there's a soul connection with you? There's some connection which they have with you, whether they remember their past life with you, they remember something they're able, with their veil is less, and they're able to connect with people who they've got a deeper soul level connection with. Could you go there?
Yes, that's absolutely the case. And it's the case on any realm you're talking about, in this realm and any other realm, because we tend to call to us and manifest in community relationships, and I'm using that term loosely, but community relationships that are usually by prior arrangement and prior design. So even otherworldly relationships, if you want to call them abductions or whatever you want to call them, significant relationships are pre-planned. Not the minute-to-minute detail of them, but the idea that I as a soul want to come in contact with this person in order to help develop me as a soul. So, there are certain laws in the spiritual realm. There's certain ways that we progress spiritually. So those hold true. It doesn't matter if we're on planet Earth having relationships with humans or otherworldly relationships. They're all subject to the same idea, which is that the main souls that we're dealing with have been pre-designed and pre-planned.
So
the difficult as well as the joyous.
Absolutely. So when you've had this connection. I'm not going to call it abduction anymore. This connection,
Sure.
right? And say they've come to you because they recognize that you are them in the past, or you are them as a soul split. They are you, right? So they know that by progressing you, actually they're progressing themselves spiritually. By your progression now, it's their progression. Could that be? But then again, I'm thinking, well, is that are they from the future then, maybe, or is sort of all over the place here with the thinking? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. See, first of all, my understanding in the interlife, it's interesting because although there is no time as we experience it here, time is used all the time, because the whole context of spiritual life is reviewing what just happened. If that isn't using time, I don't know what is. So imagine, you, Kevin, now you're whatever age, and you drop your body, and now that body's dead, you're in the interlife. You spend a certain amount of time with your group, looking over, frame by frame by frame by frame of the life that you just lived, analyzing it, looking to see, what mistakes you made, how you might have done things differently. And the most fascinating use of time is the interlife's ability to facilitate a way for you to see, well, had you taken this road over here, this is what would have happened in your life, and you get to watch it play that out. So it's just an amazing ability to use time in the interlife. So time is used all of the time, because that's the nature of life review, is using time. And also, the nature of choosing the next life is using time, because we don't just choose a body and parents and a geographic location, out of thin air. We choose it based on what we're going to get out of that life. It's our choice as to who we want to be, male or female. Do I want to be, grow up in California or in Europe? All of those choices we're going to make. And so we have to be able to see snippets of the future in order to make an informed decision. So time is used constantly in the interlife. So to say that there's no time there is actually, it's interesting, because time is used as a teaching tool in the interlife.
Would you say that your basic knowledge, and I'm not being rude here when I say basic knowledge, I mean, for what you've touched upon, is just an aspect, like a pinprick of the reality that is there. Do you think there's a reality that's even larger than you've been witness to, that's present there, that's beyond our current understanding?
Oh, absolutely. Because we only get, from what I've seen, we only get snippets and glimpses of the divine, and it's by design, because the whole agreement about being here is that we agree to forget. We're agreeing to, otherwise, if we knew the answer to the test, it wouldn't be a test.
No test.
So we can't know everything, but certain things we can discover, and, like, guess what? I just discovered that, there's going to be more to life, and we're going to see each other again, and by the way, we're here to demonstrate our compassion for each other. To some degree, that is the answer to the test, but it takes a certain level of maturity to actually put that into action. I mean, we all know people who are good at kind of saying the words about living a life filled with understanding and patience and compassion, and actually behaving that way. So, go ahead.
No, it's so fascinating what you're saying, and I know that time's just ticking away. Law of attraction, then. I really started getting back into law of attraction. I really do appreciate that actually what this is tapping into this consciousness of what we are, and forcing it to, not forcing it, but allowing it to work with us, to have in our life anything that we truly desire at a deeper level to experience. It may be wealth, it may be abundance, it may be family, it may be a relationship, whatever it is. This universe is only conspired to work with you. I've realized that. I do. Even though it can be difficult sometimes, I just realized that whatever life brings me is the best for me. And if something doesn't work out, it's because something better's around the corner. So law of attraction, has that come up in your teachings at all? And I use the word teachings because that's what you're doing.
Yes, and what's interesting about the law of attraction is that it works also from the spiritual realm. And that's the part that we agree to forget. And that can be the challenge. So if you have somebody working the principles of the law of attraction, and then they have a terrible car accident and they lose one of their legs, and then the pupils of law of attraction will say you failed on this part because you're now handicapped, for example. But the problem with that perspective is that there's also the law of attraction working from us and our own perspective as immortal souls. So we're setting things up from what we wanted to create, and we may forget what we wanted to have created. That includes, say, marrying a certain person that ends in a horrible, ugly divorce, and yet we've produced a couple kids. And it could be that the person that we had the children with, we wanted to work something out with karmically. We wanted to come back and experience that relationship, and all we were ever meant to do together was just to produce children together. We were never meant to be, in love until we were old.
I know, but isn't it a shame in those situations where we forget about the kids and it just becomes the pain of the other person and all the shit that goes with that, in a sense, all the rubbish and the arguments, when really, and we go into our own depression sometimes with the loss of all that, and we forget the kids, and they were the most important thing. I'm not saying you shouldn't put yourself first, because you have to before you can put the kids first. It's a kind of enigma, but I'm saying we do forget that, don't we?
Yes, because when we look at, it's kind of like 31 flavors ice cream. There's lots of different ways where we're tested with our ability to find solutions to problems. But there it is in a nutshell, is whether it's an ugly marriage or being fired from our job, or we lost all our money, or we have so much money and now we've become irresponsible and holding an authoritarian power over others, and we're flunking that test, whether we're a celebrity, and all incarnations hold tests, and they all boil down to having are we demonstrating an ability to find solutions to problems? It doesn't really matter what the packaging is. It comes down to that, and recognizing that wrongdoing comes in all shapes, sizes, and colors, and can we overcome that? Because when we do overcome that, that's growth made manifest.
Yeah, and it comes back to loving yourself as well, to be in that space to realize that. And if we can't love ourselves, we can't be in that space to realize that sometimes.
It's true. It's, how did Wayne Dyer used to say, bless his soul, was it Wayne Dyer who said, if you take a lemon and you squeeze it, out comes bitter, out comes lemonade. So, who we are, when it's squeezed with the pressure of everyday life and the problems of everyday life, out comes who you are in your essence, which is why we were talking about we can have more compassion for where we are as a species, and for all the horrendous violence and the bombings. When we kind of step back and go, it's all going to be okay. We're going to make it through this. We're here for the duration of the war, meaning we're going to keep incarnating. Those of us who've chosen to incarnate on Earth, we're going to keep coming back to Earth because we're dedicated to growing here. And we will evolve our species, one day at a time. We will get there.
Yeah.
And it's not easy, but we will get there, and recognize that the characteristics of immaturity are the most difficult to be around.
Yeah, and I remember being I remember interviewing Marianne Williamson, and I've also met her at a talk as well. And I remember her saying to me, me and the audience, that how can you ignore the suffering of others? And it's because she was saying that some spiritual people just ignore the suffering of others, and it's very difficult to see that sometimes. And for me, I mean I feel the pain when those atrocities happen in America. I feel it when it happens in Baghdad, which some people don't care about. I do feel it anywhere where there's something painful. As a sensitive, I do feel it, right?
Yes.
And I feel to myself, right, what can I do to make this world a better place? How can I leave it in a better place? I can't. Yeah, I don't want to ignore the suffering of others, but what can I do? And I realized in the end, it's about coming back to, I change myself, and I go out there in whatever job I'm going to do to be of service and to help people which in a sense is helping myself. I mean, some people will say, well, you can't just go out there and help people. What about you? Well, no, I say, well, do something that you would love, which will be a natural side effect of helping people.
I would absolutely agree with that. Because when we are being of help to others, of course, it rejuvenates our own energy, which is the whole point of it all. It obviously, we're demonstrating the idea that as we recognize that we're all really of the same immortal family, and of course, experiences with the interlife hammer that point home, because we're all doing the same thing over and over and over together in our soul groups, and then coming up against, in our incarnations, our past so-called enemies that we've had, but wanting to work it out again, wanting a chance to work it out again, wanting to demonstrate another chance that we can act with patience when we're around knuckleheads, for example, because the world is filled with them. The world is filled with difficult people. That's why I wrote a book about just about that. The whole point is to be up against the pain, the trauma, the ups and the downs of this roller coaster, experience, and yet continue to be of service, all in the context of hurting or struggling or learning and figuring out how to overcome obstacles in our own life.
I learned something recently that, sometimes just helping one person can just be as powerful as helping many.
I would agree with that. I kind of, that's my personal philosophy, is that it's just about helping the person who's in front of me, even if it's just helping them across the street. It's enough. I stopped. I don't market myself as a author, or I sometimes accept speaking engagements, but I give my books away. I kind of drop this whole identity. I mean, I should be on Facebook responding to people who ask me questions, but I just find that the one person who crosses my path in the supermarket who needs help finding the crackers, that's kind of my contribution. I just do it one person at a time. I have to agree with you.
Now, I'm going to go against what I just said there with you. I'm sorry about this.
Okay.
I feel that you have such great teaching information from what you've been through. I just wish that you could share it with more people. Now, I know you are sharing it. By coming on this show, you're going to share it with people. I know, and many other shows that you've been on, you've shared it with people. I just think you're walking around with such great truth that you can make a great difference. Whether you feel that way or not, I don't know. I don't even know why I'm saying it, because you probably already know this. But I just feel like I need to say that to you.
Oh, well, that's very nice of you to say. And, I help where it seems to make sense, or I have a conversation where I'm invited to have one. And as we are doing now, and we'll see where it all takes us.
Go with the flow.
Like right now, I have an elderly mother who's not well, so I'm busy with her.
Of course. And
I'm really kind of looking at this whole idea of overcoming what seem to be great obstacles in a simple way with more grace. So even as I'm always so thunderstruck about how many opportunities there are in any given day, just driving from one end of town to another, and doing basic errands. There are so many opportunities to really, look at oneself and make course corrections. It just blows my mind.
So true.
Just going to the dry cleaner, things happen.
Yeah. I can imagine. Imagine. Okay, well, we're almost at the end here, and I so appreciate we've gone over time here. We've probably said this, but what would you say could be an important message to the audience right now?
I think for me, the power is to see wrongdoing that comes our way. Imagine if there's a team of superior beings watching in that exact moment as the worst kind of wrongdoing befalls us, and recognizing that they're often tests, that we've selected for ourselves. And if we don't do well in them, we'll have another opportunity around the corner. And then if we do well in them, then congratulations. It's really about breaking down all the opportunities of wrongdoing so that then we can kind of move on to greater programs and broader programs in our own training.
Well, Lisette Larkins, just thank you so much for what has been a memorable interview, one that I won't forget very easily. And I just hope you keep shining like you do. And thank you for sharing your story with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was really fun to speak to you.
Well, we've come to an end on tonight's show. Don't forget that you can listen and watch all our past interviews on the More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new daily shows. You may also find out more on all past and upcoming guests on the show via themoreshow.com, and do like us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. So until next time, be safe.